Hello, I'm Michael Orwig, and welcome to the Wizard's Chest. With me today is a very special guest. I've known her for a while. This is my wife, Allyn.
Glad to be here.
You know how hard it's been to get this girl on camera? You have no idea. Now, I can go through all of her qualifications, but absolutely, we've been married 10 years. You know her highest qualification is her taste in men. What can I say? But other than that, Allyn has a PhD in natural medicine.
Yes.
And every day, for a ridiculous amount of time, you study and look at all kinds of material. And one of your fascinations is with water, and you wrote your PhD dissertation on water.
And, well, we'll segue into this, the memory of water specifically.
Is a big one for you.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Recently, we had a chance to watch Frozen.
2.
Frozen 2, yes. And they were talking about the memory of water. And
Right.
It was fascinating for us as an adult to actually see how maybe these ideas can actually creep finally into mass consciousness by the way of a animated, movie cartoon, which is fascinating. But with the memory of water, tell me a little bit about your thoughts with the body being 75% water of all of that. It's fascinating. And
Well, water remembers every single thing it has ever come in contact with. And that means centuries, because all of the same water that's on Earth now was the same water that's just been recycled over and over. And thank God it can clean itself for the most part, although we're putting a huge burden on it right now. So it's important to understand this function of memory in water and what is the best water that will hydrate us, what just all the different properties for our health and well-being. And we're learning all the time. I would still say we only know about this much of what water really is and water can really do.
But it's huge. Without water, we would die in...
Well, they say 3 days.
10 days. No.
10.
Maybe you can
Well,
give or take. But still, without water, we don't last very long. And one of our major problems is dehydration in the society. And believe it or not, it's not how much water you drink. It's really what water is being absorbed
into your
the
cells. Exactly. And so well, first of all, let's just back up a bit and just talk about the memory of water. So saying that water has memory there was a big breakthrough, I don't know, it's maybe 20 years ago now, with Masaru Emoto, who was a Japanese scientist who decided, for whatever reason, to cryogenically freeze. Mostly it was distilled water that he was using. And distilled water, by the way, is really the only water that is what we would define as H2O. And I'll explain that a little bit later. And he took people's thoughts and words and put them into a glass of water and then put this water in petri dishes and then cryogenically froze them. And then they looked at them under a microscope later. And for those of you who haven't seen the Hidden Secrets or Hidden Truths of Water by Masaru Emoto, he shows all of these pictures beautifully, and I highly suggest you look this up.
I'll show our group the book as well as a couple of images while we're talking.
And that would be great. And so if you say, I love you, the crystals, and it was much like snowflakes that they were photographing, are stunning and beautiful. If I say, you fool, or,
I hate you.
Or I hate you, it's all dark and
Half of them
ugly.
wouldn't even form of crystal. It wouldn't even
And
form
no,
it. It would be like
right,
misshapen
they're
and everything.
very misshapen. And it's the same for polluted water and healthy water. He also figured out...
And tap.
Well, we'll talk about our tap water here in a minute too. He figured out too that if you prayed over the water, any polluted water, like they had a bunch of monks pray over some water, very polluted water in Japan, and it changed the whole nature of the water. And this is something we can all do. And this is the good news. Every time you go to a body of water, he did the Pono Prayer, and Michael and I got to see him at our Quantum University in Hawaii, and we went out on an excursion, and we did this with him, and you say, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and you just say that 3 times or repeatedly as you're walking by or driving by any water, and this can have a dramatic effect, and Emoto proved this. So if we all took it into our hands, that we are the ones that we're waiting for, and we can clean up a lot of this water, even in our meditations or whatever we're doing, just see the water as whole and healed. This would go a long, long way to changing what is actually going on in our world. And then ingesting it, imagine every time you have a thought, I don't have water here, but there's tea, and if I'm angry and I'm gonna sip my water, that goes straight into the water. So be careful, be clear.
It absolutely responds to our consciousness.
Right. It definitely responds to our consciousness. So it's that in and of itself has fascinated me. And then there were these Russian scientists who made a movie, and they've been studying this for a long time, in 1996 or 7, called Water, the Great Mystery. And they go into very great lengths and show the memory of water. And there have been many, many scientific experiments that have actually proven that DNA, Jacques Montagnier, can transport itself between vials of water that aren't even necessarily next to each other. And he actually won a Nobel Prize for this, but we don't hear these things. He was actually, even though he's a brilliant scientist, won a Nobel Prize, they sort of poo-pooed this information. And this is why I would like to get it out, because it changes our health, because we are.
It all starts with water.
Right. It all starts with water.
Far before food, far before your supplements, whatever. The better water you are drinking and able to absorb into the cells, the better your health is going to be from the get-go.
And different people do have different needs. So I can't say unequivocally that, this water is best for you or that water. But what I can tell you is that the neutral, our blood, I actually do live blood analysis, and our blood reflects the water we drink. And when you drink a lot of the high pH waters, it isn't really good for your digestive. Now if you have an illness where you're very acidic, this may help you. But never, and I will unequivocally say this, drink that water with your food, because it will disturb your digestion. Because,
the problem is more long-term.
It's long-term.
You can do a lot of things short-term, whether it's in a cleanse or
sure, you can
drinking distilled water.
Drinking distilled water strips all of the minerals out of you, because it has none. And it's great for doing a cleanse for a couple weeks. And I know there's a lot of you out there that collect your own rainwater, make your own distilled water, but I'm hoping that you're adding really good quality minerals or a pinch of the gray Celtic sea salt, because that is really one of the best remineralizers that there is.
The powers that be never talk about the trace minerals
Not at
that
all.
are in the water. And when we do the reverse osmosis,
Right.
it pulls the energy out of the water. So if you really think about it, what do we really want? Do we want clean water?
We do.
Or do we want vitalized water?
Right.
We want that energy, and that is one of the problems with reverse osmosis. It takes the chlorine and some of the things out we want out, but it takes too much out.
Well, it
and
really
can
takes everything out. However, and this most people don't know, it does not take out the memory. You're still getting the memory. It looks clean, it tests clean, but that memory of the pollution or whatever, and all reverse osmosis, and I will name a few names, Aquafina and Dasani, those are all mostly tap water that they clean. All that water still contains the memory. And so now people won't completely think that I've lost my mind when I say that. I started on this journey basically because my daughter installed an RO water system many years ago, and I lived in the mountains and I had well water, and I would drink that RO water and I'd be like, I'd have to go home and drink a gallon of my well water in the mountains because I was always so thirsty and I couldn't figure out why. And I don't even remember if they had put minerals back in them, but this was before I even really knew anything about this. I just knew it didn't do well with me. And you can revitalize the RO water. It does take some doing, because essentially when it comes out, water does not like to be, it's forced through filter. That strips everything out, the minerals, everything. And it doesn't immediately respond. It takes a few hours if you're going to let it sit there. And there are ways which you can take that water back to 0 point, which is really, that 0 point is more like a vortex, and it erases, it will erase the memory. So spinning your water is a great benefit, and there's quite a few of those water spinners, or you can just actually stir it and make a vortex in a jar, and that will bring your water back to what we call the 0 point. So then you can start over even with the RO water and then add some good minerals, like I said, the Celtic salt or good trace minerals that you get from the store.
Couple of ones, David Wolf has always recommended finding the best spring water close by. Whatever kind of spring water might be available to you, and that's always a good source, as good a source as any to start with. Tell them a little bit about what we do here at the house with our setup.
Well, right. We have, so water has structure, and most water, as I said, other than the distilled water, is it's a combination of a bunch of different geometric forms with electrons and protons, and without being too scientific, that form various shapes in the water. And everything in our universe is geometric, and there are many people now coming out, and water is one of those structures. We have a jug that is like the Fibonacci sequence that restructures the water, and then we have an insert that we put all kinds of crystals and shungite and clear.
I'll show them a picture
right.
of it. It's a little bit easier.
And yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine. But in our whole house, we have a huge charcoal filter, which does have to be changed a lot, which, that just takes out the basics.
Once a year or 2 years.
Right. It has to just take out the basics. It doesn't. And then we have something. It's a water spinner. I don't even remember what it's called. Inline, and it spins all of our water and puts frequencies and bioresonance, and that does take the water back to 0 point. So all the water in our house is taken back to 0 point. And I did measure the pH of it the other day, and it's almost a perfect 7. So that's what our blood is. Our blood is, it doesn't ever go on 7.3 or 7.4 pH wise. And that's really the best thing that we can drink right now, which is what spring water is as well. So getting as close to that really helps hydrate.
Well, the other part of that, as we already alluded to, is getting the water into the cells. And that brings it back in with the thought of detoxification. What are some of the things that, toxin-wise, that you might know of that do wind up being in the cells that hamper that hydration? Any particular?
Well, as we know, and I've spoken to quite a few water engineers about this, we do not in most of our cities have the capacity, the money to even take out the toxins. They allow so many parts per million. And I will say right now, with this coronavirus thing going on and everyone going crazy with the sanitizers and the Clorox,
All of that's
all
going
going
to
get
the
dumped.
water supply.
It's going to get dumped into our water. And there's already fluoride, pharmaceuticals, herbicides, bacteria, and the disinfection products. And another one, a biggie, is the glyphosate in the pesticides and the herbicides. And because they're spraying 80% of all crops, and even organic ones, unfortunately, get cross-contaminated by this very, very dangerous poison that they admit's a poison, but they won't stop doing it. And I do think as people, we have a voice, and the more we know and the more we say no more, they're going to stop this process with our crops, because we are polluting our water. And like I said, it's more important than ever to take your water back to 0 point because of all of those things.
Along those lines, we've been experimenting and have used blue cobalt glass more and more in putting the water out into the sun. What exactly does that do? Well,
it actually energizes and charges your water. Scientifically, I'm not sure I can answer that, but the blue glass itself has very many healing properties, and someone years ago sent me it was an old thing from the 1800s where they used to build structures like greenhouses with the blue glass put in, because it had helped the plants grow, it helped people heal. They would just go sit in this blue glass structure. So it just restructures our water in a healthful way. You can only do it, you should only let it sit out, though. That said, you can't just stick it out in a bottle and set it out in the sun all day. It's only, basically, you have to pay attention and bring it in after an hour. Moonlight too. Moonlight is.
But the sun has its coatings.
Right, and that you do get coatings.
There are coatings from the sun that then become infused into the water.
Right.
And one of the things just around the house itself that I had seen Allyn has the PhD in natural medicine. I have by assimilation, I have a PhD in natural medicine. But one of the things I remember dramatically they're talking about is the right angles. The way they run the copper tubing in the house is everything's done on right angles. And that actually devitalizes the water. And you wouldn't really think about it. But
our whole
all of
structure, the way it's set up. And years ago, back in the 1800s, a man named Victor Schoberger, who was called the Water Wizard, He was actually a forest ranger. He went out in nature, obviously, and observed the water, and he actually watched how it flowed, how the fish could propel themselves, the salmon or the trout, up, and he would spend even nights out in the forest, and he actually saw boulders being lifted up. Just, it was like levitation in the water. He witnessed these things, and he came up with so many devices, but one was pipes that spun the water, and they were made out of wood, so that probably wouldn't have been so good. But
It was back a ways.
it was
yeah.
back a ways. But he understood that spinning the water was the way, and Rudolf Steiner is another one. He did the water flows, and water likes to flow, and so when we put it at these angles, it's not necessarily happy, and that's why it is very important to take it back to 0 point and to spin it to bring it back into its more natural state. Schoberger actually was conscripted by the Nazis to build some of the first spaceships because he started building these levitation devices because he just from observing the water. And his whole story is fascinating. There online are some documentaries and movies about him because nobody knows about him because he's been basically written out of the history books.
Now, one of the concepts within the spin, we've seen things, let's say you've experienced a tornado and they've got a lot of documented evidences of a piece of straw literally being embedded in a steel girder of a bridge. And what they've found is with the correct level of spin, the correct vibration, the correct frequency, something can actually change dimensional space and rematerialize
And that's what
as
he
it
was
slows down. And
working on. Mm-hmm.
if you think of that level of vitality, I have to believe if something changed dimensional space and then came back into a particular reality, it would be reset to 0 within its memory or different things. But there's a lot. We just would know that there's a lot of stuff's going on. Whether we know all of it's going on is another matter. But the spin for the water easily is huge. And
Well, it is one of the biggest and the easiest things that we can all be doing. You can just take any kind of funnel and as I said, they do make some devices, natural action technologies make devices and that you can take when you travel if you're wanting, and I have one actually on my garden hose that spins the water for my plants, and they love it, and they've proven like 6 ways from Sunday that when you spin the water for the plants you have higher yields and just an overall better crop of everything just by doing that. And of course if you're doing the soil and all of that, imagine there's so many things that are possible that we could be doing. And if you watch The Biggest Little Farm,
yeah.
that has some of the best ideas and shows what a healthy ecosystem is like and how they got there and how they save water in California in particular by just doing all these different things with their crops. And when you drive through some of the parts of the California, like the almonds and the olives, they're just all rows of trees, bare, and they're wasting so much water when they could be having other crops being grown, or at least ground cover that preserves the water and doesn't let it all just evaporate into thin air.
You need the ground cover.
You need the ground cover.
You need the ecosystem, and a lot of the big
Right.
the big single crop farms, they don't play with the ecosystem. They just play with
Right, they're just
their own
putting
single
as
thing.
many of the whatever plants they are all together, and boom. So California would benefit greatly, and anywhere that grows crops, but they have the problems with their water table and their stuff right now.
There's
they should
another-
hire me.
There's another way that you can charge your water that we have studied, and that's using pyramids.
Right.
A lot of the David Wilcox had written in his books, the Russian scientist that had
Right.
studied using a pyramid, and it would charge the water.
Well, it charges everything.
Yeah,
the
it
pyramid.
does, absolutely.
All your food charges.
But they would
you.
put their food,
Right.
their water, everything, at least for a period of time, in the pyramid and get amazing health effects from that. You don't need to have a huge pyramid.
Mm-mm.
You could easily have a 6-footer or something, and it would create a beautiful effect. And there's a lot that is there
Yeah,
for
well,
research-wise.
it's another tool to restructure water, and there are so many of these tools that we have as well. I mean, there are simple ones, and there's also like the slim spurling rings, the copper rings.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Well, they're all on one of the golden mean ratio, or I think that's what they're, and Slim is now dead, but I was fortunate to study with him at one point, and they make little rings like this, which are great. You can put them over your faucet or anything that your water comes out of, and just the little ring as it comes out it's a light field.
It creates a field
inside. And so the light is contained in the field, and it just changes the structure of the water, the wine, anything you put in it. We have some big ones that we keep all our jugs of spring water in, and we put it into more like the flower of life pattern. The Vesca Pisces is what it's called, and it's where the rings overlap. And that is what our friend Bill Reed, who is also now gone, who was Slim's partner, he said that potentized all of the water. So it's just taking it up to a different level.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up, tell me how you on earth got started in all of this. Do you have any idea where the passion for studying water? Because you've studied it, aside from somebody like Schoenberger, you've studied it as much as anybody I've ever seen.
Well, I too grew up out in nature. My parents took us into the backwoods of Michigan because they were trout fishermen, and we would camp and never see another soul back in those days. And I just played in the streams most of the time with my sisters, and I watched, not only the fish. Of course I learned to fish, but I observed the water and the cleanness of the water. And I didn't. It's interesting because even back then, I grew up in a farm town in Ohio, and so what happens with farm towns is all the runoff from the fertilizers and everything went into our drinking water, our reservoirs, and all of that. And then they started putting fluoride in it. And even in high school, I knew this was not a good thing. And in truth, well, my parents are long gone, but as all of their friends started dying that stayed, they didn't stay in the town either. All of their friends that lived there then died of cancer or something else. I just had an innate knowing that the chemicals and all of that being put in our water were not good. And then, I always went to the ocean, or I was lucky that I could travel, and you just feel those negative ions and you feel good. So it just, and the more I learned, the more I was like, wow, there is just definitely something to this water stuff. So that's basically where it started.
Awesome. Any ideas on what you'll be studying next in conjunction with water before we wrap up?
Well, there's a new science of water, which is, and we did get to study a few times with Gerald Pollack, who has discovered that there's a fourth phase of water. We all know that water is a gas and a solid, ice and liquid. But there's this fourth phase that's called the EZ zone, as he coined it. But basically, it's a crystalline sort of gel, like nature.
It's like a boundary layer, isn't it?
It's like a boundary layer. And this is where all the information in our body goes through. And we use crystals in our electronics and all of that. But come to find out, water also has that. Well, if it has memory, then how does it have memory, really? It's through this crystalline EZ zone that Dr. Pollack has discovered. And I think as we as things unfold, this is going to be more and more in the forefront, because it matters so much with our health. And it also, the other one is that we are all frequency beings, right? And frequencies are what are going to take us down or take us up. And that means that frequency medicine, like homeopathy and all these various other tools, but that we could spend a whole nother show talking about, will be of great benefit in the future. And I'm really looking forward to the day when we have this open discussion with our medical people.
Awesome. Well, my dear, I will have to put you on film a lot more, because I get to have the last word. Just think about that. I get to sign off, which means I have to have the last word. But one more note. This lady has studied more in natural medicine than virtually anyone I know. And trust me, there's an awful lot to it. It's a lot of fun. Work with your water and, well within that,
pay attention to your thoughts.
Yes.
That is
because we are a
one.
big bag of water.
Right.
And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks for joining us on the Wizard's Chest, my dear. Thanks for coming on camera for the first time. We've been trying to do this for some period of time. Great
and now
blessings.
that we're quarantined, he has a captive audience.
Yes, it took a virus to quarantine us to get me on the camera with her. But great blessings to everyone, and thanks for joining.